Well, all right, kiddos, it's time to sharpen up those edges and grease up your chains. We are going to live it up with mountain life. Dropping in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, mountain lifers? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Is this on mute? How about, can you hear me now? My name is Feet Banks. This is the Live It Up with Mountain Life podcast. Fall is in the air, hacky sack season is winding down, and digital communication is still a thing. It's mostly awesome though, isn't it? Talk to anyone, anywhere, for free, so long as you have a very expensive device that may or may not have been engineered to be obsolete far before its time. But even so, I don't think anyone misses those $200 or $300 long distance phone bills you used to rack up talking to your girlfriend, boyfriend, friend, whoever that lived even one city away. It's all free now, and we're definitely more connected to each other, maybe. It's hard to know, actually, but we certainly see a lot more pictures of each other in various states of undress. Speaking of progress, I had to use the Zoom for this month's pod because Emma Segal is on the show, and she lives way out east in the beautiful city of Montreal, and I am, as usual, hunkered down on the traditional lands of the Squamish Nation here in British Columbia. So the technology was our only option. And there were some hurdles, but we'll get into that later. Emma is a disruptive designer by trade, and her roots are in the clothing industry, specifically highlighting the ways it could run in a more sustainable way. But she's also an author, an artist, a master of the infographic, an educator, and a chef. And someone who is probably going to be involved when we suddenly figure out how to save the world. Just kidding. No one is going to suddenly figure that out. It's going to take a lot of work from each and every one of us, but we can do it. I believe in you. Can you hear me? Is this thing on? Before we talk to Emma, though, let's hear from our latest and greatest partner here at Live It Up with Mountain Life, Jack Wolfskin, makers of outdoor apparel, footwear, and equipment. For almost 40 years, the Jack Wolfskin name and paw print have been a symbol of their trailblazing spirit and regard for nature. Inspired by an expedition in northern Canada in 1981, they've led the pack with innovative, eco-conscious technologies, a commitment to social responsibility, and forward-thinking outdoor apparel and equipment designs. If you haven't seen the Jack Wolfskin paw print around before, it's because they've only just completed their newest den here in North America. Jack Wolfskin will see you in the wild, wherever that is for you. So that's pretty cool. An idea hatched around a campfire over 4 decades ago in the Yukon grows into a now global clothing brand. If you can dream it, mountain lifers, you can be it. So yeah, Emma Segal is on the show, and I spoke with her over the Zoom, which was not without its challenges because sometimes the machines just don't want to play nice, do they? Terminator 2, Skynet, I mean, it might just be heading that direction. Emma is substantially smarter than me, and I'm still working out how to live interview people without interrupting them at inopportune times. So there are definitely moments here where I just sit back and let her run. But life is about learning, and Emma certainly has no shortage of good things to say. I had a bunch of notes written down before I got her on the line, but then I had to restart my computer, and yeah, it was a bit of a mess at the beginning, but that's life. So here we go.
And you've lost them. I could wait. It's no worry.
No, I have them. It doesn't matter. I mean, mostly what I want to talk to you about anyhow is asparagus and pea. Because I read it. Your new cookbook is one of the only cookbooks that really acknowledges the fact that for some people asparagus makes your pee smell different.
Yeah, really, that's one of the only ones.
Well, I mean, I don't read a lot of cookbooks, I guess, but
well, ours definitely has more than just recipes. We front loaded it with a lot of sustainability propaganda.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a hefty book. It's almost 300 pages. You know, there's lots of great stuff. But
I would like to point out too that I illustrated the entire cookbook because we were in pandemic lockdown, couldn't organize a photo shoot, and I am an illustrator, so I did probably about 250 drawings in a very short period of time.
Incredible. I mean, I feel like we should talk about the cookbook, but I want to stay with the asparagus and the pea for a minute.
Sure.
You in the book send people to the internet for these theories. It's crazy. Nobody really knows why that happens for sure. I always wondered, is it in the pea or is it in the person's nose? Like, it's obviously genetic, but
well, thing is I don't think it's everybody, and it's the same with tasting coriander and having it have the taste of soap.
Right.
It's not everybody. That's specific to your tongue. And I don't know what the proportion of people is, like 50-50, 30-40, whatever. But there is a chemical compound in your pee or in the cilantro that changes the way that you experience that. I mean, these are all very subjective things. Who's to say that the red that I look at is the same as the red that you look at?
It for sure isn't, because I'm colorblind. But
I also have, my pupils are 1 millimeter larger than the average person. So I literally see different colors than people. Which actually, when I found out about this little phenomenon, my eye doctor told me when I had my permanent contact lenses inserted surgically.
wow.
But it explained a lot of fights that I was having with my current boss at the time, because I always wanted colors that were a little bit more subtle, and he always wanted ones that were more bright. And to me, they looked neon, and to him, they looked like muddy.
Yeah.
And because we were literally looking at two different colors.
Crazy. Yeah. Okay, so we jumped right into some pretty heavy science here. Using your cookbook, which is called Hero Veg, written with a colleague, Dr. Leila Akaroglu. Is that correct?
It's very wrong.
I'm just reading the letters on the words, but can you correct me on that?
It's a fun challenge to see it's a Jarlu.
A Jarlu, wow.
And we do work together, and whenever we have events or anything, I always make sure to send a phonetic pronunciation of it.
Yeah.
Not into it. It's a Turkish name, and most people do have problems with it. But once you see it phonetically, it's a car, like a car that you drive, J. So it kind of makes sense.
Well, apologies to Dr. Leila for butchering it there, but how did this cookbook come about? You guys worked together at the Unschool of Disruptive Design, which we'll get into in a bit, but was this, like you said, a pandemic project? Or
it was a little bit. So we've worked together about 7 years now, and we have done a lot of events around the world. We hold workshops through the Unschool that teach system sustainability and design as 3 interconnected pillars. And so we do short-term organizational workshops, or, ones for professionals who can come. But we also did 10, and she started this and I joined, I think, after the 3rd one, fellowship programs, which is a 7-day experiential, very intense learning adventure where we take people into a city that's invited us and take them around the city. We have mentors, and we have a particular theme. And at the end of the week, there's a 24-hour challenge. And throughout this whole week, we tell people in advance, although a lot of people don't seem to notice until they get there, but the entire week is vegetarian. We cook for them, we feed them, we cook with them, we have cooking experiences with them, because food is such an integral part of sustainability. And one of our goals is to kind of subtly impress upon people that plant-based food, like non-animal product food, can be beautiful, colorful, tasty, satisfying, filling. And a lot of people that come to our programs are people who have never eaten a full vegetarian day, much less a week, 7 days. And they're doing very cerebrally demanding work at the time. We're taking them all around different cities, so it's physically exhausting. But the feedback that we've gotten from these programs is always super positive, and food tends to be one of the highlights of the experience for people. And so we've had requests for the recipes for many years, and because we're very busy with other projects, we just didn't have a chance to do it. But we knew the community wanted it, and we have an online school with about 15,000 people in it. So, it's a substantial amount of people. And so when I was in quarantine and the lockdown happened, this all was around March 2020, we figured it was the perfect opportunity to actually do it, and started in Lisbon doing some, I'll say, like a few recipes were some wine inspired creations.
Of course.
But the majority of them are from those experiences that we've held around the world, and also drawing from our own history. She has a Turkish, Australian, and British background. Mine is Jewish, Nova Scotian, Canadian, and so on. But I've traveled and worked a lot all over the world. I started going to India in my 20s and working in Asia a lot. So we wanted to have a cookbook that was diverse, exciting, had some information and context for why people can try cooking like this, and making sure that it was accessible, easy to understand, nothing too crazy with ingredients so it wouldn't be intimidating, have some kid-friendly stuff in there, and then a whole bibliography at the end for people who want to learn more, which I mentioned in our previous conversation, this book, The Nature of Crops by John Warren, and that's a whole other thing we can dive into in a minute. But we really wanted it to be not just a cookbook, but a learning experience to inspire people to want to try this out more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you probably succeeded there in the fact that almost all the ingredients that you're using in the book are common. It's not some crazy, you know, Indonesian fruits that you're never going to see in your local store. It's broccoli, it's cauliflower, it's, carrot tops. It's stuff that we recognize, but maybe haven't always thought about eating.
For sure. And we definitely tried to add some diversity into there. So there's, especially in the sauces, there's a few that I've been making and using a long time in my cooking that do come from places like Indonesia or India and so on. But they're ingredients that you can find. Like, we've simplified them a little bit to accommodate a wide variety of people. I live in Canada, in Montreal. Layla lives in Europe. And our students come from all over the world, and they're not necessarily speaking English as their first language or any of their languages. So we wanted to make sure that it was an enjoyable experience that doesn't turn them away from trying new things. And for the people that already are in our camp, it's just to reinforce that beautiful, amazing experience that they had when they were with us.
Yeah. First of all, you've got Tina Turner lyrical references in your sauce section. It's a cookbook that references farts in the fiber section. Like, there's a lot of personality in there. You've obviously done a lot of writing through your work, but is this the first book, like, published in book form for you, or?
Well, I've contributed to books before.
Right.
So that is more around topics to do with sustainability. I've written a lot of articles. Writing is not something that comes naturally to me. And when I wrote my thesis for my master's, it's like 200 pages or something. It was very painful. I am a very, very visual person, but it's something that I think is important to have in my tool set, my skill set. I will say that Layla is an extremely good writer, and she's a very evocative writer, and she does a lot of keynotes and public presentations. So she's very skilled in that. And we co-wrote it. So going back and forth, we do this like kind of bouncing back and forth of ideas and edits and so on, trying to make sure that we each have our own voices. And then, because this is through our organization, we do have an editor that we have on staff. And so she went making sure that our typos were not too terrible, and trying to figure out whether we should spell everything with OU or O, or what
where did you land on that? The Canadian English spelling, or?
It might be a mix, because we really wanted to make sure that we didn't detract from, we didn't want a uniform voice. We wanted to still have our own personalities in there.
Right.
And so at the beginning, of course, it's like a little bit more consistent in the voice, but then throughout the recipes, you'll notice that Layla will start some of them by saying like, oh, I grew up eating this in my home, and I'll say something very similar, reference a family member. So we wanted to make sure it was a really collaborative effort.
It feels like that concept of collaboration and throwing out the old rules would be something maybe fairly common for you guys in your, path forward to saving humanity.
I mean, we are called the School of Disruptive Design.
Yeah.
And our design agency that Layla started is called Disrupt Design. And initially with this cookbook, my initial idea was, in fact, not to have any measurements. I really like the idea of intuitive cooking. Of people sometimes can be very intimidated by cooking. How many teaspoons? How many tablespoons? Yeah. But when you get down to it, the idea of cooking is making food that tastes good to you. So you want a tablespoon of cumin, go for it. Like, if you don't like cumin, just put in a little bit or none at all. So that was my initial idea, which when you're not with somebody in person, it doesn't really work as effectively, which is why we do put some parameters as a guide around what these are. But when you do, if you've done any cooking, you know that if you bake a cake in Italy versus if you do it in Chile, the humidity levels, the altitude, the origin of the spice and materials that you're using will change the outcome. So these things do have to be adaptive. It's not at all a Bible. It's kind of a guidebook, reference, idea generator of things that you can do, and then hopefully gain a little bit of confidence and start just experimenting. Like most of those recipes we just invented because we're confident in the kitchen, but that comes through experience.
Yeah, and tasting it as you go.
Absolutely, you must taste
and clean up as you go.
Absolutely.
You said you grew up on the east coast of Canada, Nova Scotia. Was it a big seafood family? What did your folks do when you were a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mom and my dad were what they like to call back to the landers.
Right.
They don't like to call themselves hippies or anything, but it was solidly the 60s, 70s.
My mom made the exact same comment to me when I called her a hippie on a podcast. So we weren't
Yeah.
hippies. I'm like, well, you had hair down to your ass, and all we did was listen
I
to Peter,
saw
Paul,
your
and
wedding
Mary.
photos. My
Yeah.
mom crocheted my dad's wedding vest. It was brown, and they had the round glasses. I'm sure they were smoking pot. Like, come on.
Yeah, and or growing it. So
Yeah.
they were back to the landers. Did you grow up without electricity, or how severe was it?
In the beginning, yeah, my dad, literally, this sounds like a fairy tale. And I even wrote a little bit in my thesis. When they moved to Nova Scotia, he was a forest ranger for a brief period of his life. He cut down the trees, let them rest over a year, and then had friends come and so on. And they built a literal log cabin in the middle of the woods. There was no electricity. There was an outdoor bathroom, an outhouse. I had deer for friends. My mom wrote a diary and talked about my deer friends. So it was a very idyllic, beautiful, nature-based, immersive, safe experience that I have extremely fond memories of. And then we did move a few years later to a house that was a little bit more modernized, but we still used a wood stove for heat in the winter, in addition to an oil tank, and had a well for the water. So I had to be attentive of droughts in the summer, and would fill up barrels of water and put them in our bathtub in case we ran out. We would need to wash dishes, flush the toilet, and be prepared to go to a friend's house if even that supply got low. So I grew up very much like picking food from our very extensive garden, playing. And I think all people of the 70s, grew up in the 70s or 80s, where your parents opened a door and were like, don't die, come back soon, come back for lunch.
Totally.
Very self-sufficient, independent. I had an extremely beautiful connection with nature that I think was very formative. And my dad and my stepmom were artists. So he was a potter for a long time, and so was she, as well as a painter. So I grew up very connected to art, to manufacturing on a small scale, to entrepreneurship. And all of these things very, very much informed the trajectory of my life, and the things that I'm very involved with now and that I'm interested in, and has really shaped the way that I have a relationship with the world.
And do you have any brothers and sisters in those days?
Yeah, I still do.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Great to hear.
She's still around.
So you grew up as a little gang, or was there a big age gap? Or
she's 18 months younger than I. And she now has 4 children. It's very interesting to watch her raise her children, because she was always my younger sister and still is. And she's watching the dynamics now between her eldest and her younger siblings.
Right.
And I think she's starting to understand, like, as you do when you become a parent, or any experience that you have, you get a deeper understanding and reflect upon your own experience previously. And she's experiencing a deeper understanding of what it's like for inter-sibling relations, I think, which is a very fun thing to witness.
Yeah. Do you feel validated a little bit in your
a little bit?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
It's interesting. I had a very similar childhood. No electricity, no plumbing until I was 6. Cottage on a lake, very similar. Hippie parents, quote unquote. And one thing we spoke about earlier this week was just sort of, you mentioned a sort of fetishization of nature, a cultural push that way. Certainly in our industry, half my job is to convince people that they should be spending time in nature for the betterment of themselves and the world, hopefully. But I wanted to dig into that a bit more. Sure. What do you mean when you say the fetishization of nature in our culture?
Yeah, so the experience I just described, how I grew up, was delightful. And you asked about seafood. We had a pickup truck that would drive to our house off the dock with lobsters and what other fish they just pulled out of the ocean for us to buy, very cheap, like $3 a pound and so on. So I grew up with that. And I lived in Vancouver, and you're in BC, and it's an extremely beautiful, welcoming, soft. I remember moving to Vancouver and thinking, wow, the air is soft here. It doesn't hurt your face. Like, coming from the East Coast, right. I lived in Toronto for 20 years. I live in Montreal now. It can be very aggressive when you leave the house in the winter. So this is Vancouver and BC in general Canada in general is a very privileged place in the world. And for the outdoor industry and the sports that I love to do as well, hiking and all the other things that come with that, we happen to have the benefit of a beautiful, accessible piece of the world where we're not necessarily going to die if we walk outside, especially in the summer. We can go for a hike on Mount Seymour. We can go to any of the beautiful national parks that are maintained through our tax dollars and contributions. and it can be relatively inexpensive, relatively safe, not scary because you're surrounded with it. And so we have this perspective of it that is a little bit idealized in some ways, and perhaps tend to forget that in a lot of circumstances or places in the world, nature is not so welcoming or hospitable. It can be quite hostile. And that could include not just the weather patterns or the heat or the coldness of it, but also the access of it. Like if you need gear to go out and kayak, if you need a down jacket to not, die, get frostbite in -30, for example, these are all things that cost money. And they're things that are quite specialized with the materials and the procedures that they take to create. And they require materials that come from the earth, usually from a place that's not local to you. And for people who haven't grown up with such easy access to the outdoors, maybe in the inner city where they don't have a lot of parks or structures that allow them to get to those places easily, it can be a little bit intimidating. You think about being surrounded by people and stores and everything else your whole life, and then somebody takes you off into the forest and says, enjoy nature, it's beautiful. There's no lights, there's no sound, you don't know where you are, there's noises you've never heard of before.
Sure, even physically, some people's ankles really have never been off of pavement, right? And so put them on an uneven surface and they're physically not adapted.
Yeah, and I think it's, I love nature, and I think it's really important that we stay connected to it. And the disconnection from nature is a big problem in sustainability for a lot of people, the same way that with eating vegetarian food or eating with meat, you go to the store, you buy a steak, you don't really think about the cow necessarily. Yeah. And the same way with nature, like when we go to a park, we don't really think of like the woods and the wilds that are out there, and how that can be actually quite intimidating or even scary to people who haven't had a positive experience with it. I mean, I have friends who have done lots of hiking and still don't like to do it because they don't want to be dirty and sweaty. And
sure.
I love rolling around in the dirt, but that's not for everybody. And the way that you grow up and experience it and are culturally exposed to it can really affect your experience. And I think it's really important to have a diverse set of ways to present nature, and to remember that we are ourselves nature. We are a part of nature. We are one of the many animals that coexist on this planet. And that is something that tends to get a little bit overlooked. We're like, oh, we're mankind or humankind. Right. We're the people, and that's nature. But we are part of this ecosystem. And we are interconnected with that in so many ways, through the food systems, through the infrastructure systems that we have, pollution that goes into a lake, that goes into our drinking water, that goes into our irrigation, and so on. So having this connection with nature, yes, on one respect, it can really contribute to better mental health, to being calm, to all sorts of, there's a million studies on depression and nature bathing and all of this kind of stuff. But it can also help us reconnect to where we come from, how we're living on this planet, this beautiful, unique planet of which no other planet yet has been discovered, with all the things that we need to survive in a very small sliver of life, like the zone of life that we live in between the atmosphere before it gets too thin and the ground before it gets too hard to survive in, is a very small sliver that is in a very tight balance of natural systems, the hydrosphere, like the way that the water cycles through the air, the rain, the lakes, what we drink, and so on, the carbon cycle, so the CO2 that gets absorbed by the plants in the ocean, and the oxygen that they each give, like one out of every 2 breaths comes from the ocean. The other half comes from the trees. We normally just think of the trees, but the ocean is a huge part of that. And so it's this kind of relationship and interconnection that I think is really important for us to understand, not just on isn't this a beautiful experience level, but also we are very deeply integrated and a part of this system, and it behooves us to take care of those systems in all of the ways that help us sustain our life. Like the world is not going to collapse tomorrow if we overpollute, but humankind might cease to exist,
Right. And so obviously that's a challenge. I think about, wild salmon and fish farms and that battle out west out here that's been raging for a while. And, I will speak with friends in Ontario or even Alberta, and they don't really see the problem. They don't care. They don't see wild salmon. They've never seen a whale. So they don't recognize the importance. Like out here, it's in our face every day, right? These wild salmon feed the entire province. You know, the trees, the forest, the tourism, everything. You've been sort of in this disruptive design space, and I mean, you know, fighting the good fight to save us all for a couple decades now.
Yeah.
How do you stay optimistic? You know, as you know, there seems to be. We talked about good news when we first met. You were explaining to me like, hey, if you focus on good news, you'll notice a lot more of it than if you focus on bad news.
Negativity bias for sure.
Yeah. So how do you stay motivated, you know, to after all these years, as by some metrics, it looks like we're sliding down the drain still.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. And for the first, I don't know, 15 years or so of my career, I was exposed to a lot of the behind the curtain kind of experiences of manufacturing and products being made. That was what I did. I'm a designer by trade. And I created a lot of consumer goods, apparel, and worked in the factories in all sorts of countries around the world, including here and in the States, not just, you know, factories in India and Thailand and so on. And so I think with a lot of people who go down these routes of the kind of job that I have, what tends to happen is you develop an existential crisis. You're like, wow, the world is really messed up. I can't believe this is what is happening. There's a lot of like indentured labor, slave labor that goes on to create the beautiful existence that people in North America and Europe more often than not experience. And so I got to the point where I just decided I couldn't do that anymore and went back to school because I realized that all of the things that I was doing at my work to try and make things better were backfiring on me because I didn't know the science behind it. And sustainability at its core is not about feel-good things. It's not about recycling per se. It's about scientifically optimizing the systems that we work within so that we're using the resources in the best way possible, whether they're biological resources like food. And right now, it's a very famous stat that something around 40% of food gets wasted. And that's a huge contributor to methane and greenhouse gases and so on. So these are all like very science-based change tactics that I wasn't aware of because I was a designer who just wanted to make things better after I saw how terribly things were being affected, both environmentally and also socially. So I went back, I did my master's, I changed my entire career to pivot into doing design for good, for social and environmental projects, which is how I met Layla. She was actually my thesis supervisor, and now we've been working together for a long time. And it's been through my experiences now, having had that first experience of seeing how terrible things can be, and now doing projects that focus on changing things for the better, that I am exposed to all the amazing projects and initiatives around the world that people are doing. I read the literature on a daily basis as part of my job. I travel around the world running workshops or collaborating with other people to run workshops or assisting Layla with workshops. And we meet people who are doing incredible projects. And I have said before, I could not do my job if I wasn't optimistic. I have been able to witness a huge change over the past few decades. And I get to meet people who are doing incredible things all the time, and people who care passionately, like all these people who are at the Unschool or students of ours, they care very, very passionately about it. And especially in the past 5 years, the amount of emails that I've been getting from companies that I can't say the name of, but are some of what you might consider the quote worst companies in the world. These companies are made up of people who care, right? Like they're big monolithic companies, but there are people in there who are passionate and want to change things and are trying their best. And I think the important thing to remember is that sustainability is new. Like we started making mass-produced plastics and so on, and all these other things that have kind of messed up the systems in the 30s, 40s, etc. Now it's 100 years later, and we're seeing the ramifications of those decades of not knowing, first of all, what the negative effects were, and then knowing what they were and not knowing what to do about it. And now we're in the stage of starting to understand some of the things that can help, in fact. And so these are like very baby steps, like nascent stages of developing new ways of doing things, developing what we are calling like the circular economy or regenerative practices or any other kind of business model that is taking this huge ship and slowly trying to turn it around. Yeah. So that what we're doing is not extracting from the earth and from this people that make the things that we use every day, but instead it's in some way regenerating those systems or giving back, or at least coming even for now. This is a long journey that we're on, and it's started and it's going, and people are doing amazing things, but it's important to remember that we're going to make mistakes for sure. People have to accept that these companies that are trying to make these changes are very intimidated by making a mistake and being called out for it. And also knowing that a lot of the science changes every day. Nobody knows the perfect system yet. And there's going to be trade-offs that we have to accept and work with and just iterate on as we continue to develop new ways of doing things.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have sort of a systems change for sustainability corporate guidebook coming out in September. Are you seeing it? Is the willingness for change coming from like upper management leadership, or is from across the country? Like, are there people in these unnamed companies that are willing to stick their neck out a little bit and potentially, drop some stock points for the greater good?
Well, the one thing I would say is that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to drop stock points. And there are great business cases of companies that take on these ways of doing business in a different way that have profited enormously from it, not just for their reputation, but in some instances, you can reduce your production costs. And so you can increase your profit margin.
Right.
And there are a lot of people, millennials, of course, are the most famous kind of group of people who care about purchasing things that are more aligned with their values, or even having jobs that are more aligned with their values. And so there's a huge group of consumers out there who do want to buy these products. And one of the examples, which is now a very old example that illustrates this, is when Walmart changed to organic cotton and when they changed to organic yogurt. I mean, Walmart responds to consumer demand. They're not making organic yogurt because, they care about the environment necessarily, although they have had some great leaders at that company, but they're doing it because their consumer base is willing to pay for it. Right. And so, it's kind of a triad of effort. It's government policies that either incentivize or have kind of punishments or taxes on bad behavior. There's also the companies that are needing to change the way that they do things now, either through the products that they make or the operations that they have through their business. And also the consumers who vote with their wallet. Like, it's a time-honored phrase, you vote with your wallet. Every time you buy something at a store, you're sending a signal up the chain that you support that and you'll buy more of it. And it gets complicated because sometimes, we have less choice or there's financial restrictions and so on. But the responsibility lies on everybody in general. We're all complicit in some way, contributing in some way. We're all a part of this system. And so the more we can kind of become aware of the big and small ways that we can contribute in our own sphere of influence. So as a consumer, as an employee, as a CEO, whatever your position in life is, you're going to have various levels of influence, and then trying to leverage that influence in a way that is going to make the most positive impact with the least amount of unintended negative impacts, which requires having some guidance and knowledge and education, and potentially getting guidebooks like the one that you mentioned, which we are putting out, along with an internal training platform that we're launching in the fall. And we also have 2 workshops coming up, like in October and November. One is on the method that we use to create change, the disruptive design method, and then a business and sustainability one in November. So the resources are out there, and we're framing it like the same way that you take safety training or diversity and equity training, any kind of training like that. The sustainability training needs to be a part of your corporate culture. And so many big companies are starting to do this now, like hiring sustainability managers, this whole categories of jobs that didn't exist a few years ago. Yeah. And now have titles on LinkedIn, for example.
Right. And on, for the time being, jobs that robots can't do. I know that's a big fear. The robots are going to take all our jobs. But
I mean, most things in the world, this goes back to one of my passions, like everything that you touch is made by humans. Yes, robots help you out. And there is a stat I've been unable to confirm that the most of all machines in the world, there are more sewing machines than any other machine in the world, because you still need human hands to make a curve. Like, I can look at a melamine dishware, or even I bought this pepper the other day. It's got a hand stamped name on it, the phrase of the type of pepper and so on. Like, everything that you use in the world is designed by somebody, otherwise would be sitting on dirt in a forest. Yeah. And it's designed with human hands. And I love that aspect. It's one of the things I love the most about visiting factories, is seeing how manual and tactile the world really is.
Right. And what about when you go to the grocery store and it's the automated teller? How do you feel about those?
I mean, there's always trade-offs for me. The convenience factor of it is quite nice.
Yeah.
And there's definitely jobs that are going to shift and change, and there is always transition periods, and some of these jobs are going to end up being reduced or moving. And there's always the question of who's going to do the retraining. What if this person is 60 years old and can't retrain, or they're too close to retirement? These are very complicated social questions that are going to cause problems that we all have to work through. Yeah. But change is constant. It's going to happen. The future is imminent, So I find every time we have a bit of a social change, a cultural change, there are going to be things that go by the wayside. And you could argue that this might help correct some, because when we shifted our manufacturing from being locally made here in North America or in Europe or whatever was close to your city of origin, that was offloaded into other places that create a whole sequence of terrible effects. The manual or indentured labor of people who get paid subsistence living. We talk about like fair wages, but what is a fair wage? Is it fair for that country? Is it fair in general? Like, can they thrive on that, or is it just surviving? So this shift of manufacturing from being a local solution to being a outsourced solution created a huge domino effect of negative impacts. And one of them is that it completely offshored an entire industry of manufacturing. And those are very skilled jobs. Sewers are very skilled. Tool and die workers are very skilled. All these jobs, which are good paying jobs, they provide a lot of security for people, disappeared over the course of several years, maybe a decade or so. And so the idea of bringing some of those back, I've always thought is inevitable to happen, just with the cost of things rising. And also in those countries where we've offshored manufacturing, the people there have, in some cases, started to profit from that. And as those people develop more economic flexibility, they start to send their kids to school. The kids don't want to work in factories. And so some of those countries have become more and more expensive because the next generation doesn't want to work in a factory. Right. Understandably, Yeah. And so the manufacturing industry tends to shift to the next least expensive place. And it's inevitable that one day we're going to run out of being able to take advantage and exploit human labor.
Yeah. There'll be nowhere left to kick the ball down the road.
Yeah. And so it will come back here. But that is potentially an opportunity to have more skilled jobs in those industries that have left decades and decades ago and took with them a lot of money and jobs. So, there's always challenges and opportunities. And one of the things that we try to teach people is how to look at what all those potential ramifications might be. And every situation is very contextual, very different. And it's not a one size fits all answer, but it's a question of what are the potential impacts, trying to reduce the amount of negative ones and optimize the positive ones and figure out what is going to be the best path forward.
Yeah.
And then be flexible and adaptive as you go through that.
So you get to travel a lot, prior to the pandemic. You for your kind of original career, you're in factories all over the world. Now you're doing workshops and teaching all over the place. What do you like most about coming home back to Canada?
Ooh, well, I love Canada. I grew up here. I have a lot of sentimental attachment here. And when I think of the idea of where is my home, it is in this country. I have a very emotional attachment to it. And a lot of my friends and my close friends are here. So I really appreciate that. There's definitely times in my life I've lived outside of Canada as well. And I appreciate so much about the places that I've lived in, how they've contributed to my worldview, of course. But also helped me, there's a thing that happens with astronauts when they go up into space and they look down on the planet and then they come down and they have a little bit more of a global perspective of like, my home is not just one place. It's this tiny blue and green globe floating in the middle of nothingness in the vacuum of space. And so I think coming coming back here gives me a little bit of that experience. And I like to have a more expansive view of what home is, even though emotionally, like I did grow up here, this is my culture, my community, and so on. But it definitely makes me appreciate, depending on where I've been, how privileged we are here. We live in a beautiful bubble of safety, of roads, and that changes for everybody, of course. Different people are more or less safe here, and we have huge problems with the way that the First Nations are treated and immigration issues and all of that. But also, I can walk down the street and not have to worry about, people carrying guns. I know that my healthcare is covered. It's a friendly place to be. The nature is relatively friendly and accessible for me to go to. So I do have a very deep appreciation for how lucky and privileged I am to have a passport to this place that allows me access to it and to come back. Like, for example, during the pandemic, I wasn't in Canada and had been out for many, many months.
Right.
And to be able to come back here, where once my overseas insurance coverage was canceled, I knew I could come back here. And if I needed it, I had healthcare available to me, despite the fact that our healthcare system was collapsing at the time. But, it was something that is not necessarily available in a lot of places. And I've been very sick in other countries and did not have the benefit of a doctor. For example, I had malaria overseas and I was in a town where there was no doctor to come and check up on me.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful. I try not to take those things for granted.
I think, we have a lot of space here. I mean, I know people that barely noticed there was a pandemic because they kind of live in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
And their lives didn't really change. Like, they would still go ice fishing and then, so what about the international reputation? I know, we've always told ourselves that Canadians are much loved around the globe. Do you still notice? Are you still noticing that, or is that getting chipped away at? Or
yeah, I think that the branding of Canada has been very effective. We are a nice place. People are nice. Everybody's experience is going to be different. Of course, I know people who have been very victimized by this country as well. And that's, something that's undeniable. Canada also has some very terrible history when it comes to pollution of our natural resources. But most people don't see that. We have a great marketing campaign and we do have an enormous amount of space. Like, this really hit home for me when I moved to Vancouver. I had this is going to sound very bougie, but I had like access to a sailboat there, and we would sail out into English Bay Harbor and look back, and there is this tiny jewel of a city. Vancouver is a very small, relatively small city. And when you're out in the harbor on a boat and look back on the city, it's completely surrounded with mountains and forests as far as the eye can see. There's no development. There's no sprawling malls. I mean, there do exist there, but from the distance, once you get out of Vancouver, as you know, you can go straight up north for days without encountering much of anything.
Flying over Vancouver takes a couple minutes, right? Compared to flying over Greater Toronto.
Oh, I mean, I've flown over Mexico City, Hong Kong. Sure. I mean, just going home to Nova Scotia, until the plane is coming over Halifax, it looks like Nova Scotia is uninhabited. There's a million people that live there. And they have a lot of space per person when you look at it. And so we are very, very lucky to have a lot of access to space. And as we take in new people into the country, like Canada has a big immigration push and we bring in, hundreds of thousands of people a year. There is, inevitably some group of people that complains and says like, where are we going to put them? Like, well, we have massive amounts of space that is available to be had. Maybe you don't get to live in downtown Vancouver or you don't get to live in downtown Toronto. And I think the pandemic really helped people kind of expand their idea of where they could live with that. And with the rise of remote work as well, the capacity to make a living for yourself, make a home for yourself in places that are not urban has also been kind of a byproduct of it, for better or worse. I mean, there's benefits to living in a city. You don't have to commute as much. Everything is closer. Yeah. Your impact can be a little bit less. But if you live in the country, you're not commuting every day. That can be a beautiful life choice that has started, because of the pandemic, is becoming a little bit more of a legitimate option for people.
do you guys dip your toe into that sort of city design? I know there's something going around the internet called the Line, which is like a long linear city. Have you seen that in Saudi Arabia?
I did see it.
It looks
Yeah.
like it looks like it's something from
Like
um,
Space Odyssey 2001.
yeah, the Bruce Willis movie, Fifth
Yeah.
Element. It looks
Oh,
like the Fifth Element, right? Like,
oh, Fifth Element. Yeah, for sure. As a piece of art, it looks beautiful.
yeah,
We don't personally do a ton of work on urban. We did a project with the United Nations called the Anatomy of Action, which identified actions big and small that you can do in your own sphere of reference or community context, and that changes depending on where you live. I have personally designed spaces. So I used to work for the Canucks. I used to work for the NHL, as it happens. And I did some wayfinding design, which is the design of the spaces that you go to and then how you navigate within that. And it's a very interesting part of design. Airports are an amazing example of wayfinding design because you need to move large groups of people through a space to the right places very expediently. And the way that you can both subtly and overtly guide them has a huge impact on not only how they move through it, but also how they feel about that experience too. Like it's no accident that when you go through a line at the airport, it's a little bit like a cow corral. You're meant to be kept in line to feel like you need to adhere to the rules and not make a fuss and wait quietly in this line that is interminable. But these are all very specific. These are not accidents, these are very thought out, intentional ways of designing the way that we move through the world. And you see that all over the place. Hospitals, like these big infrastructure buildings are really obvious examples of it. But even just if you think of the way that the choice of house or condo or apartment or tent that you live in, whatever it is, this impacts so much your mental health, the way that you move through space, how you wake up, your mindset, how you see yourself in the world, like what your social hierarchy is or your status. And those choices are driven by so many different things, your desires, your financial flexibility, your income, your background, your culture, your history. And there is an expression that we like to say is like, we design the world and it designs us.
right.
So we design it through the actions. Like I buy a certain color of plate or a beautiful rug that makes me happy. And we also go into places that other people have designed that then affects the way that we experience the world and react to it.
And is there a risk of, nefarious agents using these subtle design techniques to, it's basically a form of mind control?
Yeah, that would be the very dark pattern version of it, which I love ranting about.
Do you ever see that though, where people are using the same things that you specialize in, but for less altruistic purposes?
Oh, I mean,
other than
on Facebook,
other than the entire marketing industry in general, I guess.
Yeah, the entire market. I mean, it's really interesting how things are manipulated and leveraged in that space. There's even small examples like when bamboo is a type of product that can often be used in a greenwashing way. Like it's a very sustainable, it grows really fast. It's hard, durable. People use it for scaffolding. There was a surge at one point of people using it for fabric. Right. And they had to change the law because people were saying 100% bamboo and people buying it thought this was great. What a great eco choice. And then they had to change the name of it legally. And you have to say bamboo rayon or whatever it is, because the process, if you think about it, to make a tree, like a very hard substance into a soft fabric textile is a very intensive process that requires a lot of chemicals to break down something that's hard into something that's soft and pliable. So, that's just a small example, but there are very misleading things like that. And some of it's done intentionally, absolutely 100% for sure. There's even laws against what you can market to kids because they're a vulnerable population, be taken advantage of a lot, like with cereals and manipulating them to tell their parents what to buy and so on. But there's also a ton of greenwashing that happens or let's say badly intentioned initiatives that are done just because people don't know any better. They do it unintentionally because they don't realize what they're doing. They don't have the background. They weren't taught this in school. There's not a lot of programming out there in education for being like what you could say an active citizen or sustainability sciences or systems thinking. This is not the same like curriculum as we get math and science and history, but also how to be a good human. Like that's not part of the.
Yeah. But thankfully we all know what a parallelogram is.
It's the one that's star-shaped, right?
Yeah. It's a crooked square, maybe.
Yeah, it is a crooked square. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely people that take advantage of this, and I see, varying shades of gray of it, from people who are doing MLM schemes, like pyramid schemes, or selling shit on Instagram about how to sell shit on Instagram. There is a lot of people are people. There is some bad people out there for sure. And then of course there's ways that governments and companies manipulate the way that we think about things so as to deflect the responsibility. For example, at one time it was the responsibility of companies to take back their bottles and cans that they put out into the world.
Right.
And then through initiatives, they developed this idea that maybe it should be up to the consumer. So now we bear the burden of responsibility. And that was a very specific thing. Corn syrup, for example, or corn syrup based sweeteners was due to an overproduction or over surplus of corn that was being grown because of subsidies to that crop. So there are some things that are a little bit shady for sure, and have had some negative effects on our health, on the way that we spend money and all of that. But I do believe at my core, like most people are good. And a lot of the examples I see of people who have done things tend to be unintentional, which is why we teach a lot about systems thinking. So we're like, okay, you care a lot. And the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And I was certainly guilty of that. Like I came to this work because I was unintentionally causing more harm than what I was trying to solve.
Yeah.
And it's through getting the experience and knowledge about how we are connected to these systems that we engage in that we can start to mitigate and reduce the negative impacts that we're having, and also start to make divestment choices away from people that are manipulating the systems intentionally.
I feel like language plays a bit of a role. I mean, most of our things that we do wrong are, unintentional, due to a lack of knowledge, due to ignorance, right? But people hate to say, I was ignorant about that, whether it's, the verbiage around discussing the First Nations and getting the, correct words for that particular nation, or whether it's, I thought I was doing good by buying these bamboo shorts, or what is... People are the problem. People are the solution.
We design ourselves into this mess, and we can design ourselves out of it. I do really believe that, because I see it in practice all the time.
Right.
And then, also, there's nobody else. Like the deer are not going to design us out of this.
The aliens aren't going to come down and help us build a bunch more pyramids.
I'm a huge fan of Douglas Adams, and I'm pretty sure the mice and the dolphins are not helping out in this case.
I'm sure they're fed up with us all. What about, we might be getting too deep into the theoretical world here, but do you think our current system of democracy services the future, or does that need to shift? I mean, I feel like a lot of politicians are just trying to be politicians so that they can have a job in 4 years, and half their time is spent making sure they get the job again rather than doing the actual job. Is there a way to fix that? Does democracy, the quote is, democracy doesn't mean your ignorance is as good as my knowledge, but a lot of people treat it that way. How do you feel about that? Like, does it feel like the government's there to help, or does it hamstring you, or is it a pawn of the corporations? Is that it? Are corporations the real answer?
I think all of the above, for sure. Shades of gray. So here in Canada, we have a democracy, quote unquote. I'm sure people will debate that. We have essentially, for better or for worse, two parties. We have some tertiary and, other parties, the NDP, we put third parties. Here in Quebec, we have even more. But essentially, it's always a fight between the left and the right. Here in North America in particular, in Europe and so on, and in other countries. There are examples of other ways to run places throughout the world. And there are examples of really interesting leaders. I mean, of course, now New Zealand has an interesting leadership. Iceland, I think I was just looking up the resume of the new president of Hungary, who's this kick-ass lady. So I think at the end of the day, what the biggest problem is division. We want to categorize and silo people into either historical sides, because it's what our family grew up with, it's what we know, it's what we think is safe. And that division, instead of having a collaborative approach, is what creates the most problems. It's not, of course, the government is doing things with taxes that favor corporations so that they can establish their headquarters here and contribute to the tax base. Like, there's all sorts of problems. And as I grow as a human in the world and develop different career hierarchies and different salary levels, I become, as a, just personally, more and more acquainted with, why do tax shelters exist? Oh, that's why. Ouch, that hurt. Like, sure. As you go through and experience these things, or if you run your own company, if you're an entrepreneur, you start to get a much deeper understanding of why certain corporations might choose to incorporate on the island of Isle of Man or other places that shelter their money. Like, I understand how these things happen, why they happen. I understand, of course, as a politician, you have to run a campaign to get votes. So you have to say the things that will make people write on their ballot they want you. And then I'm sure you get into that position, like we all do with any job, and all of a sudden realize that this situation is much different than what you thought it was, because you didn't have access to all that data before. You didn't know how messed up things were, or what the manager or other parts of your other stakeholders in your organization are, whether it's politics or a company. And so, these are things that we have to have a very flexible mindset around, I think, in trying to encourage a more collaborative, open, and transparent system, being open to de-siloing the way that we historically have segmented people and practices and procedures.
And then does that go all the way through human civilization, like that sense of tribalism that used to be the only way to survive was to get the right size tribe for your area?
Sure. I think there's levels of it. For example, we don't necessarily want to homogenize humankind to the point that we don't see different unique cultures, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many beautiful unique cultures and there's a lot of places that preserve them in different ways. Here in Quebec, there's the Francophone culture is a distinct culture. Obviously, First Nations and Aboriginals around the world. There's areas in India that you're not actually supposed to go into because they have nomadic tribes that live there and they don't want to be contaminated or so on by the people who live in the rest of that area. So there is a beauty to all these diverse cultures and communities and ways of thinking and practices, and we can all benefit from sharing that knowledge. But when it comes to things like overall health, safety, and wellness, like, I think there are some things that we can come together on and all agree, like universal health care for everybody in the world would be a good thing to have. And that might look different in every place. Maybe some places have more homeopathic practices, or maybe some places have alternative therapies. Like, there's lots of modalities out there and proponents of them and so on. And that's a whole other thing. But having access to safety, security, food, clean water, these are all things that we should have as baselines, and is not equitably dispersed throughout the globe at the moment. I'm no politician. Like, I don't want to
I was going to say, you got my vote. You could be a benevolent dictator.
A benevolent dictator.
Have you been to Bhutan? I
haven't been. It's quite, the way that Bhutan works, and for people who don't know too much about it, is they have a happiness index there. It's a really interesting way of measuring not GDP, which GDP doesn't account for a lot of externalities in our economy. Like, for example, happiness, motherhood, and these other very key critical aspects of being alive. But they have a happiness index. And also, when you go you can't just fly there and be a tourist. You need to buy a package. And that package is very specific to how many people are coming, where you're going. And that money, it's quite expensive to go. And that money goes back into the community in various ways. And I think that's a really interesting way to handle the way that people interact with your culture, and also have impacts on the ecosystem that you live within. If you've been to Thailand at any point in the past few years, like, I started going there for work 20 years ago. And so I've seen it progress, and the air pollution there is absolutely atrocious. The amount of people, tourists that they accept into that country or have descend upon them every year is astronomical. and they leave a huge impact behind. The amount of water bottles alone is incredible, and it's created a huge problem. And Bali is the same, beautiful pearl of an island in Indonesia that I adore, that has a huge issue with tourist pollution. But at the same time, some of these economies are also very now dependent on those tourism dollars, and have kind of adapted to need them. And that's a conversation that is also, again, quite complicated, because you can't just say to Thailand or Bali or any of these cultures that have a tourism dependent economy that they're no longer allowed to accept this many tourists, because a lot of people are going to be out of a job. But at the same time, is it okay that however tens of millions of people come and swamp Thailand every year?
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
So one of the things, like with this project with the Anatomy of Action that we talked about, is a more responsible type of tourism. If you're going, take longer flights instead of a lot of short-term flights, stay for longer in one place, reduce the amount of hopping around that you do, reduce the amount of travel, try to engage with the culture, contribute back in some way, try to have a regenerative effect. Don't just come in there to extract and experience it at your benefit, but to the cost of others and so on. So just having a little bit more of a conscientious kind of awareness of the impact that your presence is having, and also the luxury that it is to be a tourist. This is a thing that you only do if you have disposable income.
Well, and the pandemic, I think, taught us that, as well as the value of learning more about your own area, right? Like,
for sure.
Especially,
one of the best trips I ever took was a 2-week car drive across Canada.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah.
What's I mean, we're starting to wind up close to our hour here. We barely scratched the surface on half the things I wanted to talk to you about, but
we could have a part 2.
We might have to have a part 2. We haven't even talked about the monarchy. They have so much land.
Processing, hunting.
As far as you were talking, well, let's just what in the old days, going back to the nature, this is a mountain life. The idea of us being so fortunate to have this nature, not everyone being comfortable there. I think about in the old days, you could say take a hike, and that was an insult, right? And now, I feel like that might be the solution, but for many of us, maybe not for everyone.
I'm pretty sure you might have had a T-shirt that said "take a hike" on it at one point in life.
Yeah, right. And now I have resting beach face or something like that. What's your favorite thing to do with your free time? And it feels like you're very busy all the time. How do you unwind?
Oh, for me, I mean, I have a garden. I grow things.
Right.
This is important to me. I like having my hands in the dirt and feeling connected to the ecosystems that support my being alive.
Yeah.
If you don't, I think for like anybody who has any issues with climate change or air pollution, I'm like, just try hold your breath, see how long it lasts. Like, we need the trees, they're in your best interest. You want a clean ocean. You will not survive without them. So I feel very connected to the ocean. I grew up so close to it. And growing food, this goes back to at the beginning of the conversation, like how much my beginnings impact the way that I interact with the world now. And for me, that is something that is calming, soothing, meditative. I like to run out in nature, on beaches, in parks, and so on. I love going on hikes, and I'm never happier than when I'm on a train somewhere in a new place and I have no idea where I'm going or what to expect at the end. Awesome. I love that kind of adventure. But that's uniquely my particular experience, and everybody has something different. And I think one of the really key things with any kind of experience or sustainability initiatives is everybody has different priorities in life. And so if for you, buying products that don't extract from the animal world, or buying products that don't use synthetic materials, quote unquote synthetic materials, because they're made of petroleum, you can't have everything perfect all the time. And for me, I live in a city as a trade-off to the fact that I like to be near the services that I use every day. I like to be near the market. I have a beautiful market near me called Jean Market. It's one of the largest outdoor markets in North America. I have a backyard. My trade-off is that I live in an urban setting.
Right.
But I'm okay with that, because for me, the pros outweigh the cons. And for somebody else, they might have a completely different experience. And we need to just have a greater acceptance of everybody's different permutations of that, and that everybody has different priorities and circumstances and access and capacity and privileges. And there is no right or wrong answer, really. It's what makes sense to you in your particular context, with the assumption that you're also trying to have the least negative impact in the world and on people, and contribute back and have a positive influence in your community.
Obviously, if people want to save the world, they just need to go to www.unschools.co, right? And jump into your universe. The book is on there, Hero Veg Cookbook. But really, people should be thinking about where they spend their money, where they spend their time, right? And that's
not only that, but encouraging the services and companies they interact with, the governments they interact with, obviously go vote, to also have their voice heard with those organizations, because they do respond to your demands and your support of them.
Vote for Emma.
Oh, no,
the benevolent dictator. The benevolent dictator.
Don't vote for me.
Emma, thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic. We just scratched the surface. We'll do this again. And yeah, it's great to connect across the country. This is our longest we've ever hung out.
It's true. Thanks for listening to me rant about all the things that I care about.
I love it so much. Again, www.unschools.co. The book is on there, The Hero Veg. What about your website? I've noticed that's been under construction for a while.
Yeah, classic designer problem. Too busy working on other people's projects. But it's segal.co. And there is a link there to projects on infographics that I do to communicate nature-based, usually information. And stay tuned, because it will be done soon this year. Fingers crossed. And then there'll be a lot more on there, like I'm available for freelance projects and consulting and all that other stuff. So it will eventually be on there. But otherwise, the Unschool is a great place to find me. I get all the emails first, so I will respond to you.
Fantastic.
And also come and take the workshop in October that I'm hosting and teaching with Layla, who is a wonderful, amazing, inspirational person. So it would be really fun to have everybody come join that.
And in the meantime, I'm going to make some carrot top pesto. Thanks, Emma. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, all right. Right? Did you learn something? Have you got some ideas? Are you ready to go disrupt some shit? That's okay if not, because after I finished recording with Emma, we remembered something I had wanted to ask her about. So we actually turned the recorder back on and made the first ever addendum to the Live It Up pod. So check this out. Emma, as a postscript here, and I've never done this where I've turned it back on, but yeah, one of the things you told me is so many people go out into the forest and starve to death, even though they're surrounded by edible food.
Well, I hope it's not so many people, but yeah, it does happen. And that's always fascinated me, which is why I wanted to recommend this book, The Nature of Crops by John Warren. But this topic of being connected or disconnected from nature has come to the point where it is possible to go and get lost in the woods and starve to death, even when you're surrounded by food, because we have lost the ability in many cases. Not everybody, of course, there's communities that are still very connected in this way, but a lot of people have lost the ability to recognize food that isn't processed or packaged or bundled and put in the store. And so it's a very fascinating concept to me. And you see now there's a lot of workshops around foraging and seeing even what's in the city. Like here, there's a lot of herbs that grow wild in the streets. I see thyme all the time. I see shiso a lot in the alleyways here, which is an amazing, beautiful herb that you typically see in kind of high-end cocktails or Vietnamese cooking. Even in my backyard, I have shamrocks that grow, and shamrocks are different than clover. They look a little bit the same, but they have a little flower, a little yellow flower, and they're edible. You can eat the leaves and they are delicious, and they're used in Vietnamese cooking. So the idea to me of being so disconnected that you can literally go out into a place and be surrounded by food that can be cooked to keep you alive, to provide you with sustenance, and yet we don't see it because we have an untrained eye. We've lost that ability. So for me, I think it's a really interesting aspect of reconnecting. And if you live in a place where there is food in those forests or natural spaces around you that is not poisonous, and that you have people that show you how to do it, and you have the capacity to go out into those spaces to do it, I think it's a really worthwhile personal development thing to do and something I'm really interested in. And the whole point of the John Warren book, which is referenced in the back of the cookbook, is that we eat a very small percentage of what's edible. If you think about the animals that people generally eat, they're like cows, pigs, chickens, a bunch of fish and seafood and that category. And a huge amount of animals we don't eat. And then we eat, well, probably like a few tens of vegetables, carrots, eggplants, some spices, whatever it changes where you grow up and where you live and what grows, mangoes. But at the end of the day, it's probably in the hundreds. But in reality, out in the world, there's an estimated hundreds of thousands of plants that are edible. And we have selected a small portion of them to grow, cultivate, adapt into ways that provide us with a lot of nutrition, like corn, for example, or any other of these staples that we have been farmed in a way that provide increasing amounts of nutrition optimally and hopefully in some cases. And there's hundreds of thousands of plants we just didn't for various reasons. And right. It's a really interesting, I love that book because it talks about the cultural history of like, why do we eat lettuce and not the leaves on oak trees, for example? I mean, there might be a very good reason. Leaves of rhubarb are poisonous. We don't eat those. But there is tons of other things out there that we don't eat. And that's just something that I find really interesting and something that for me personally, I want to learn more about and develop, and something that I think can be a really nice entry point for people to reconnect with nature is through food. Yeah. And so I really like these workshops where people take a group out to forage and then cook a meal in the woods with the things that they gather.
Yeah. I have the book, Edible Plants of Southwestern British Columbia. It's in my survival kit, though, like end of the world kit. The fear is that I'm not going to remember which is which. That's why I have a hard time picking mushrooms, right? Because you sort of have to be into it to really for me to have the confidence. I don't have the confidence.
For sure. But like anything, I mean, when I started to learn how to drive, I was terrified. And you can, an inexperienced driver can get in accidents. People drink and drive all the time. These are very dangerous practices. But if you go out with somebody to show you which mushrooms some are very easy. Like there's, I don't want to like misspeak here, but it might be a false morel and morels. Morels are really delicious. False morels are poisonous, but I think one of them is hollow inside and the other one's not. So just knowing basic things like that, like with anything that we don't know or it's new, it's a little bit intimidating, of course. And even for you, like you're an outdoors person, right?
No, totally. With a shitty memory.
Yeah, it's a little bit intimidating, but it's a skill that you develop.
Yeah.
And we put work into hiking, into learning how to rock climb. Like think of how dangerous rock climbing is.
Yeah.
So, I think that if you can do outdoor activities like that, I think it's a good idea, or like an interesting part of the outdoor experience to, if you're out there already rock climbing, hiking, swimming, scuba diving, whatever, is learning what actually is surrounding you, not just for you to experience as a beautiful view and to take that in and consume it in a way, but also, what are the things that are potentially there that can help support life? How, if you take some of that, like if you take mushrooms from that place, how can you regenerate them so you're not just extracting that
to properly harvest?
Yeah, and it goes far back. I mean, it's very obvious to look into First Nation practices because they're farming the wild. I did a little bit of work with a community out in Ucluelet, and anybody who's had the opportunity and honor and privilege of working with those groups, and especially the way that they work with nature, will understand that it's a much more harmonious relationship traditionally, to the point that they told us this story that they were approached by a marketing company and they wanted to figure out what word that they used for the term wild. They're like, we want to communicate that BC is this wild, supernatural, beautiful place. And it's so, like wild, getting back to the fetishization, like people want to go experience the wild. And what they told us in this workshop or talk that we were engaged with is that they don't have a a word for wild, because they've been grooming this area that we experience as wild, but they experience as manicured and as farmed, and they've been taking care of the trees. And what looks to us like a forest is to them what we see as streets. They know the directions that they're going in, they know what these landmarks are, and for them, the closest word that they had was the word home.
Right.
Because this is their home, and they work in tandem with that space to create a reciprocal value exchange. I think would be like the best way to say it, so that they take what they need to survive, but give back enough so those natural ecosystems stay in balance. And obviously that's a very idealized version of that idea, but we do see examples of it all the time in all sorts of First Nations or Aboriginal cultures around the world. And we look to those ideas and concepts as ways of integrating regenerative practices into the way that we communicate and interact with the world going forward.
For sure. Much to learn there, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I do eat ants. The Skeena River ecosystem has some of the best ants we've ever eaten. They taste like lemon.
I almost accidentally bought, and I didn't buy them, I have to tell you. I was buying snacks for a friend, and I picked up this interesting looking popcorn. I was like, oh, it's a biodegradable package, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, this should be interesting. And I turned around to the ingredients. It turned out they were made with cricket flour.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What do you think about that? Is it, some people think the cricket industry is too processed, and other people say, hey, people have been eating crickets since the beginning of time.
Sure. I've eaten crickets before as an environmental intervention. Crickets put a much less of an impact on the planet than cows do, for example. Yeah. And they're very high protein. They can be tasty. It wasn't what I was looking for on that particular movie night.
Well,
but there's people all around the world that eat all sorts of insects and bugs, and I definitely think that's a really great area. And there's all sorts of cookbooks that you can totally experiment with all kinds of grubs and insects and whatever.
One piece of advice: don't eat crickets if you're allergic to shellfish. Apparently they are related. And
also, I will say that cicadas taste like dirt. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy cicadas.
There you go. If you don't mind, some people like the taste of dirt.
Yeah, that's true. As my sister would say to her kids, don't yuck my yum.
Oh, nice. That's better than don't harsh my mellow.
Yeah.
Emma, thanks for this little postscript. We're going to come back and do it again and talk about down and reindeer hide and all the other things.
And aquaculture farming.
There we go. Awesome. Yeah. Have a great day. Have a beautiful weekend.
You too.
Okay, that is the end, I promise. Thank you, Emma Segal. Be sure to check out the Hero Veg Cookbook, which you can buy as a PDF or a hard copy online at unschools.co. There are a ton of great programs and courses on there as well, including the Business Systems Transformation Guidebook Emma mentioned. That's out now. It's called Swivel to Sustainability, and it's for anybody working in any level of business, how to tighten up your ship and how to get sailing in the right direction. I think we're definitely going to have Emma back here on Live It Up. Maybe some short segments, maybe something longer again. We just make it up as we go around here in case that's not apparent. But until then, thank you, Emma. Thanks, Jack Wolfskin. Thanks, Shirai Rules and Adrian Gendro off the top for their skills, voiceovers, and music. And thank you, Mountain Lifers, for playing along once again. Happy autumn. Take care of each other out there. And don't forget to leave the campsite and anything else better than when you found it.